Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 26th of June, 2023. Goodness me, the summer solstice is over. Winter is soon to set in. Summer is just a pipe dream of next year or something. That's a bit depressing. Let's get to the opening gambit for the news today, which is the Ukrainian general staff losses for the Russian forces for the day before. All the usual caveats apply as ever. 950 liquidated personnel is definitely going towards the high end. We are now edging towards 1,000. We did have a day earlier last week where I think it was as a result of the 300 dying in Pyatikatki, Russian soldiers, and then another hit on another establishment that perhaps took 170 casualties that pushed that above 1,000. But otherwise, we've been in the 500 and 600 mark today. We're inching towards 1,000 again, 950. However, only one tank. So that's a very low number considering what we have seen in the past. 14 APVs, 21 artillery systems is still exceptionally high, and there's an awful lot of footage out there of these bits of kit getting taken out. 10 drones, no anti-aircraft warfare systems. It says no cruise missiles, but there were a few cruise missiles shot into Ukraine last night, I think at Odessa mainly. 16 vehicles and fuel tanks and 5 pieces of special equipment. Special equipment can be electronic warfare, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance boards, so things like the miners, mine clearing vehicles, or excavators, things like that. Okay, let's go and have a look at a few bits and pieces to support some of these figures or give us an understanding of the losses. Yesterday, we heard that 7 or 8 airframes were taken out in Russia as a result of the Russian on Russian attacks. So that was Wagner hitting the VKS. 3 Mi-8 NTPR 1s. These are rare and valuable standoff electronic warfare platforms that the Russian VKS use, meant to jam both enemy early warning and GBAD, that's ground-based air defense capabilities, 3 of which Wagner forces downed yesterday. So that will be a big loss going forward. You're starting to see the footage, or at least the pictures of destroyed airframes on the ground now, helicopters and the IL-22 plane. So yeah, I mean, they were definitely taken down. That much is certain. How much of a loss that would be to the Russians is yet to be seen, but 3 of these helicopters is quite a loss. Last night, there were 2 cruise missiles that were taken down. I don't know how many were fired. I think I don't know whether at least one landed in Odessa, whether that was the debris from a destroyed cruise missile, whether actually it found its target or at least wasn't shot down. So yeah, it's a small bit of activity. Indeed, here Tim White says we're not being told exactly well what the cruise missile on Odessa hit, but there were a lot of doors and windows blown out by the force of the explosion this morning. So that seems to indicate a cruise missile was not shot down. And I'm not saying it found its target, but it did land somewhere in Odessa. Ukraine has said that Russia is losing 8 times more soldiers than they are. That's the Deputy Defense Minister Malya. Quote, our aviation, missile forces and artillery over the past week have carried out 110 strikes on enemy personnel concentration areas. So that's just on 110 strikes on enemy personnel concentration areas. There's not strikes on, self-propelled mortars or strikes on this or that. These are specific strikes on personnel, and that the assumption is that accounts for the huge Russian losses in comparison to the Ukrainian losses. We have seen, I think, a slightly calmer front line than we may have been expecting given the counteroffensive. I think the Ukrainians have learned that it was being a bit too expensive in the early days, so they've pulled back. They're using troops more than mechanized equipment, but they've also, I think, pulled back and are letting their ranged munitions, whether that be Storm Shadow, HIMARS, other artillery like tubed artillery and drones, they're letting those systems do their do their work, and that is exacting quite a toll, I believe, on the Russian forces, rather than trying to trick them using their own troops, mano a mano. It's not to say it's not difficult for the Ukrainians. Goodness me, yeah, we are still continuing to see Ka-52 helicopter footage. This one is footage targeting 4 Ukrainian vehicles on the Zaporizhzhia front line. It's difficult to see what the vehicles are, but you get the idea. These helicopters are a nuisance, and the Ukrainians need an answer. They need some medium-ranged ground-based air defense systems to take these out. Things like Jesus wept. I had that. I had that on mute. I just blow my ears out. Oh God, I hate you sometimes, internet. Okay, well, I'm completely thrown now. So yeah, they need some medium-range ground-based air defense systems because the man-pads don't have the range for these. These have, I think they're man-pads, well, not their helicopter pads, if you like. Their rockets that they use here, the missiles they use here, have I think a 6 kilometer plus range, which means that they can sit behind the range of man pads that Ukrainian forces might be using on the ground. So you need something with a medium range really to hit these things, and they do need to be taken out. Let's see a bit of footage. That's what I was trying to show you. But it's hard to say what is being hit there. The video footage isn't very good. It's interesting actually. Someone said yesterday how possibly we knew that the drone footage hitting the front line somewhere perhaps near Robotina that the Russians were claiming was them hitting up in Kupiansk, but it had dragon's teeth in. So the implication was that that's just Russian disinformation. They're just taking some Ukrainian footage and claiming it as their own. And I think someone's saying that they claimed to take out hundreds and hundreds of people in that. And it appears to be complete nonsense. So someone's saying, we know that's Ukrainian footage because the video quality was that much better. So if you're going to have that kind of 4K HD or whatever video capability, then it's more likely to be Ukrainian than Russian. Okay, Russian, talking about air defense systems, GBADs. This is a Russian 9K-35 Strela 10 met with the fine accuracy of Ukrainian artillery of the 56th Brigade. Here it's reversing in, parking up, and getting hit. Music is off. It's when you stop and play, but you don't. You play by pressing on the screen, and then it just kicks in mute out. There you go. You can see the munitions cooking off there, so that thing is definitely hit and is something of a goner. Okay, I find this footage interesting. So an FPV drone hit a Caterpillar crane used to create defensive structures in Lokot in Kursk in Russia. So this is in a Russian oblast, and you have a first-person view drone, obviously quite close to the border here, and it is taking out an excavator, digging trenches. So the question is, why would you use this resource to do that? Why not just let them build those things in? So it goes and hits out. I'm not going to show because obviously there's some people there. But why would you show footage of, or not? Why would you show? Why would you target that kind of vehicle or that resource? Why go into Russia to do that rather than use that FPV drone on the front line somewhere else? So are you really planning on hitting trenches in Kursk? Is this something that is part of the Ukrainian operational strategy, or does this make the Russians go, oh, they could be attacking Kursk, so therefore they get worried and pile in more resources into building up defenses, and those resources are themselves kind of wasted? That's probably a more plausible option. I don't think the Ukrainians would have any intentions on going into Russia in any major way. But it just seems interesting that they'd be targeting something like that inside Russia, which is digging a mine, rather than targeting, I don't know, the piece of electronic warfare system or something. Anyway, on to other bits and pieces. And of course, we're going to talk some degree about Yevgeny Prigozhin and what happened over the weekend. So Yevgeny Prigozhin remains under investigation in connection with the rebellion as it became known to Kommersant, so that's a Russian media outlet, on the morning of June the 26th. A criminal case on organizing an armed rebellion, Article 279 of the Criminal Code, the main defendant in which was a founder of the PMC. All these rumors are flying around about what's going on. We've had pretty much radio silence from Shoigu and Gerasimov, and really Putin. And we've had radio silence from Prigozhin. Prigozhin has done a deal with Putin, and I'm trying to work out what has happened. So he was marching towards, and I've said an awful lot about this, but I'm just trying to still see if there's some further clarity. He was marching towards Moscow and then suddenly stopped. And I talked about how this is probably the best result for both of them if they both, they're both needing to stay alive and get out of this with something. Then actually, what's happened seems to be the best course of events for them both. Combat Veteran Reacts had actually quite an interesting analysis on this, where he was saying that realistically there had to have been a really good deal for Prigozhin. So his supposition was something like Putin's health is failing. There would be some really tangible promise that he would be next in line if he just waits it out a little bit in Belarus. Something like that. And that seemed pretty plausible. There had to have been a really good reason why Prigozhin suddenly called it all off and was happy to go to Belarus. And there are other theories going on. But if he is still being investigated, then that throws a bit of a spanner in the works for most of the theorizing going on. A Russian MOD has released footage that is claimed to show the current defense minister Sergei Shoigu at a forward command center near the front line in the west. This footage comes as rumors continue to swirl that Shoigu is now being investigated and possibly under house arrest, pending his removal for the MOD due to the theft of military funds. So this will be pre-recorded footage, almost certainly, of him pointing out things on a map because, Zaluzhny's done that, so, he's got to do that. He appears to be a fairly ineffective military leader. He's actually got no military experience, so quite why he's Minister of Defense, I don't know. But the rumors are that he is under house arrest and that he's going to be done for theft. I mean, why would you ever take any position in the Russian government? Because there doesn't seem to be any transfer of power ever that's not something like this. People don't go, oh, right, someone else is replacing me. Okay, fine, I'll just retire quietly. It's like, no, you've been done for theft and you're going to go into prison. And that's how we're going to get rid of you. I suppose in this particular instance, Russia will, if they got rid of Shoigu quietly and just said, yeah, we're replacing him, that would look like the Russian government were bending to the will of Prigozhin. This allows them to get rid of him with reasons that are not connected to Prigozhin. Say, right, we found out he nicked a load of stuff, so actually we're sacking him and we're getting Surovikin instead. Right? Then Prigozhin gets his way, but the Russian government aren't looking like Prigozhin is pulling the strings. That actually he was always going to go because he's corrupt. As if none of the others are. So Russian, this is Anton Gerashenko, says the Russian Telegram channel, which is the one that Chris Owicki often refers to actually, says the moods in Shoigu's environment are panicked. He himself is isolated. Staff decisions might be announced by tomorrow. Operation Investigative Group has been formed and is at work. Shoigu is currently in isolation under the watch of personal security, comprised of FSS employees. Department of FSB and Investigative Committee started studying materials of criminal cases on the theft in MOD back on Thursday. So this is possibly seen as their way out when they started getting rumors of what might take place with regard to Prigozhin. We heard that Putin might have had a 24-hour plus heads up on what might be about to take place before Prigozhin did his thing. Russian intelligence services threatened to harm the families of Wagner leaders before Prigozhin called off his advance on Moscow, according to security sources. This is according to the Telegraph. This is pretty significant. In fact, it might be worth just dipping into that article. So there are a few interesting nuggets in this piece in the Telegraph. So Russian agents threat to family made Prigozhin call off Moscow advance. Russian intelligence services threatened to harm the families of Wagner leaders before Yevgeny Prigozhin called off his advance on Moscow, according to UK security sources. Now, this then goes back to what I was just saying. Something has to have been really important for Prigozhin to have suddenly called it off. Now, either the deal was just really good for him, such as being promised X, Y, and Z at some later point with real tangible promises, but then those can always be broken. Russia's not the sort of place that you can trust those future future rewards possibly. So this is a fairly plausible explanation as well, which is, oh right, so you've got the families, FSB ran the houses of all my main dudes, right? Okay, this could be a bit of a problem. It's also been assessed, and this I would definitely agree with because I was wondering this myself. So there was all this talk about columns, and always talk about 25,000 people, and I was trying to count up the kind of vehicles that are being used in these columns, and there's just a few trucks, few SUVs and stuff. And I was thinking, that ain't 25,000 people. I didn't say anything about that, but I was wondering in the back of my head, like, really how many were advancing on Moscow? It's also been assessed that the mercenary force had only 8,000 fighters rather than 25,000 claimed and faced likely defeat in an attempt to take the Russian capital. I mean, lots of people are saying it would have been really unlikely for them to be able to take Moscow. So there's potentially a lot of saber rattling going on. The analysis offers clues into the mystery of why Prigozhin, the Wagner leader, called off his mutinous march on Moscow on Saturday, just hours before reaching the capital. There remains speculation about what formal deal was struck, if any. The Kremlin said on Saturday that Prigozhin would head to Belarus in exchange for a pardon from charges of treason. But then, are they still investigating him? I don't know for sure. And then just a little bit later on Sunday, the Russian MP Andrei Gurylyov, a prominent Kremlin propagandist, said there was no option but for Prigozhin and other high-profile Wagner figures to be executed. So that is pretty damning. Now, this was a video I didn't show you yesterday, but I probably should have done. Meanwhile, the members of Russia's convict army have issued threats against Prigozhin, claiming he betrayed them by abandoning the Kremlin coup attempt. A video posted online by the prisoners turned fighters accused Prigozhin of cowardice, saying his supporters had been double-crossed and now faced retribution. So these guys, if they're left behind, there were rumors. I mean, reporting from Ukraine said that there were open fights between remnants of Wagner around Bakhmut and the conventional Russian forces. And then this led to perhaps some opportunism from Ukrainian forces around Bakhmut, where they've made most of their gains from yesterday. Uh, a video posted saying they'd been double crossed. One of the Storm Z soldiers could be heard saying that Prigozhin had promised everything to them and then turned the steering wheel in the other direction. So yeah, it's really interesting to see, what has taken place here. Dmitry from War Translated says, and again, this is just speculation from his part and analysis from his part. So take the subjectiveness of this for what it is. It was rather curious following the opinions of public Russian personas yesterday while the events around Wagner unfolded. Those who are naturally close to Kremlin, various military reporters with millions of followers who recently attended a meeting with Putin, they rallied around the president. But others appeared much more emotional. Many had wild mood swings. They genuinely believed something was about to happen, and in one way or another put their bets on Prigozhin. With the ending being so anticlimactic, I wonder how many are now finding themselves in a battle to recover their image. This is the first time I've seen so many calls and prayers to God to help Russians in this situation. They were on the edge. It could have ended very, very badly. My impression is that Lukashenko literally saved Putin's life by convincing Prigozhin that going after him would lead to a disaster for both the Kremlin and Minsk regimes. I think that many will be left with an unpleasant aftertaste. The situation around a shot down aircraft will be a heavy anchor going forward, and the lack of public statements is indicative of the struggles each side is facing. Dmitry goes on later to say Lukashenko made the move to save himself first and foremost, since if something happened to the Kremlin, no one would protect Lukashenko. So Lukashenko, this is a really good point. Lukashenko is in place as a result, the Putin and the Kremlin. So when there was that kind of very dodgy election more recently. Like he was initially voted in, as far as I remember, and then he's been, re-voted in, but he wasn't, and basically been propped up by the Kremlin. So the Kremlin goes, arguably he goes. I don't think the Belarusians would have too much time for him. He's become more of a classic dictator. He has been quite canny in navigating that fine line between not getting involved in a war but helping Putin enough. Yeah, we're not going to send our troops, but you can have some of your uh, aircraft take off from here and so on and so forth. Troops positioned in Belarus, and now obviously tactical nuclear missiles, perhaps. Um, but Dmitry continues. I suspect Putin wasn't even going to negotiate with Prigozhin, but Lukashenko saved them both. So I mean, some people are saying he's the one that's come out the best here, Lukashenko. This is a bit of. I was going to end the whole video with this meme just because it's quite poignant. Russian activist jailed for 10 years for posting anti-war stickers realizes that shooting down Russian helicopters and killing Russian soldiers may be the key to avoiding prison. This is just a very good point to show that, hey, Wagner can shoot down 7 or 8 airframes and kill those Air Force members and then get away with being pardoned and going to Belarus and or getting taken back into the Russian army. Whereas someone that's posted a bunch of anti-war stickers is going to prison for 10 years. It's really, yeah. Uh, okay, moving on to something different now. 4 out of 6, and this should be huge news. 4 out of 6 power units of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant are mined with explosives and are ready to be blown up by the occupiers, says Budanov, head of the main intelligence director of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Quote, the situation has never been as serious as it is now. There's a lot of talk about how the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, is mined and ready to go. And if that happens, I mean, that is the weaponization of a nuclear power plant that is pretty much functionally the same as setting off a nuclear missile. So that would be a very ill-advised thing for Russia to do, because I would assume NATO would just get involved. There was calls recently by European nations to formally put in place that if there's nuclear fallout that has any effect on NATO countries, that is in effect an attack on NATO countries. And so that would then stop something like this happening, because you get kind of Article 5 attached to something like this. And very interestingly, and this will be connected to something we'll go on to in the Frontline part in a second, we officially had the first Russians requesting airstrikes via Telegram of the counteroffensive. So this Telegram post was really pretty fascinating anyway, talking about how there's operations around the Antonovsky Bridge by Kherson, where the Ukrainians have got a foothold and they've sent fighters across. According to the latest information, reinforcements continue to arrive to enemy units. The total number of manpower in the bridge area at the moment is up to 100 people, so on and so forth. And then for several days, artillery, including heavy flamethrower systems, attacked the enemy in this area. But as colleagues rightly noted, only tactical aviation at the Russian aerospace forces can solve this problem. Ground forces do not present an effective solution. If necessary, all available information, as well as the coordinates of enemy concentration sites, are ready to be transmitted via any convenient communication channel. In other words, they are saying, we've got all the information to hit these positions with an airstrike, but we can't get hold of them, so we're putting this message out on Telegram and telling you we've got the coordinates. There is a lot of talk that the Ukrainians have been quite successful at jamming communication at the moment. So something like Telegram might actually be one of the only ways they can get through. There's some talk as well that these positions would be prime targets for FAB 500 bombs for the Russian VKS, their aviation to utilize, but they haven't as of yet, as far as I know. And the Russian forces are calling out for those strikes to take place. Right, let's go to see what's happened on the front line. Malyar Deputy Defense Minister says at the end of last week, we started counter-offensive actions in the areas of Orikova, Vasilivka, Bakhmut, Bodanivka, Yahidne, Klishchivka, and Kurdiimivka. Those are all north and south of Bakhmut and Bakhmut itself. In each of the directions, we advanced 1 to 2 kilometers in each of those directions. So if that's true, huge. Now the troops are entrenched at the achieved boundaries and continue to destroy the enemy. She says, right, a little bit of detail on this. Ukraine advances up to 1 kilometer in Bakhmut direction, says the Kyiv Independent. Ukraine forces advance 600 to 1,000 meters, so Malyar said 1 to 2 kilometers, on the flanks of the strategic city of Bakhmut. I'm not sure it is strategic. I think there's been lots of arguments to say it's precisely not strategic. It's just a big PR stunt for the Russians. The spokesman for the Eastern Command of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Serhiy Cherevati, reported, I guess it's now strategic in a larger sense for the Ukrainians, as in it enables them to fix the Russian forces in such a comprehensive way or important way that it allows them advantages elsewhere operationally, or further afield on the southern front, for example. So therefore, that's the strategic value of the city, is kind of extrinsic value. As to what it can achieve. The rapid and peaceful reconciliation between the Russian Defense Ministry and the Wagner Group arouses suspicion and speculation about troop redeployment while Ukrainian forces make significant advancements on the battlefield, said the Euromaidan press, as they refer to reporting from Ukraine's video. And here you can see a screenshot of that. He's talking about the forest area to the north of Klishchivka being advanced into, and also down by the canal, and perhaps even across the canal into Ozarianivka and Kurdiimivka here. So could be some important advances there. It doesn't mention anything about the north, but apparently activity in the north as well. And these are the tree lines by Klishchivka. In addition, Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Osman fighting for the 24th IDAR Battalion reports that 1/3 of Klishchivka forest is under Ukrainian control. As there are 3 forest strips around Klishchivka, it's not clear where this is exactly. Either way, they are close. And then interesting update from the Russian channel regarding Antonivsky Bridge. This is kind of what I was referring to previously. I don't know actually if it's the same feed or not. The enemy holds a small foothold on our coast for at least 3 days. The units of the Russian armed forces withdrew from the area as a constant action of enemy artillery and special forces of the enemy created a threat of encirclement to our forces. They retreated with battles. Neighboring units came up to the rescue. As a result of the fighting, the Russian armed forces suffered losses. At 6 o'clock, the enemy with forces of up to 50 people operates on our territory in the dark, builds up a group and supplies it with ammunition and technical equipment, trying to expand its zone of control. A short distance across the water, up to 1 kilometer, does not allow prompt artillery strikes against enemy high-speed boats. There are differing claims as to the quality of the ground around here, as to how far they've got, so on and so forth. But there is video footage coming out, so footage of the landing of Ukrainian troops from boats on the left bank of the Dnipro near the Antonivsky Bridge. You can see these are Ukrainian troops on the Russian side. This is Russian drone footage as far as I understand it. Ukrainian troops are operating with boats. There were claims yesterday of 3 tanks getting across and a ferry enabling them to get across. Here we have a bit of footage that's really gone quite viral. It seems that the information that the Ukrainian forces have taken control of a bridgehead on the left bank of Dnipro in the area of Antonivsky Bridge is confirmed. This is a Russian BTR-80 conducting sporadic fire in the direction of a possible landing of Ukrainian units. The claim is here, actually, that this BTR was evacuating Russian troops, and kind of as it retreats is firing off towards. And remember, when you see tracers, there's usually kind of 3 other rounds in between each tracer, so it's not like there's just those rounds. There's lots of rounds going there. That is the BTR. I don't know if this is it coming in, collecting some troops and then getting out, but I believe this was an evacuation move by the BTR here, and then it skedaddles, as far as I understand, afterwards. Yeah, and there you go. But I won't show you all that footage due to time constraints. And then, so that was significant because it then showed, and they were admitting, I think, that they were evacuating as well. This is coming from Russian sources, so it shows that the Ukrainians have a foothold on the eastern side of the river, which is massively significant. And if they can then, get in dribs and drabs, get more and more equipment across, it becomes quite a serious thorn in the side of the Russians, considering they have arguably moved some of their forces away from the the Dnipro River after the flooding took place, because they thought, well, they're not going to attack across the river now. To the front, Velika Novosilka axis, so further to the east. This is in the Donetsk area, just before the Zaporizhia Oblast border there. Ukrainian troops advance on the flanks from Levadny and Storozheve. That's in that area and that area. Rivnopil is still Russian controlled, and Russia counterattacks near Makivka. And Rivnopil have somewhat increased but failed. So the Russians are still holding on there, trying to fight hard in that area. Wargonzo, who, whether it's actually him or someone on behalf of him, is posting that Ukrainian units managed to take up new positions near Pryutne. So that's there. Sorry. And northeast of Rivnopil, Russian troops with artillery support tried to counterattack near Makarivka, Zolotoniva, and on the outskirts of Vuhledar with no success. And then if we go to the Bakhmut area, no report says third separate assault cleared all Russian remnants of the 57th Motorized Rifle Brigade west of the canal, confirmed by the 3rd SAB commander Bieletsky. UA forces have advanced onto one of the Klishivka forest strips. So that is there, and there's footage coming out to sort of support those claims. Last couple of days, there were strong rumors that the Russian forces managed to grab a foothold on the left bank of the Antonivsky Bridge. Today, multiple confirmations from Russian sources as well as Ukrainian sources, and this is talking to that based on reports and visual. That map likely looks like this. There is a large contested area, as this is flatlands and poorly accessible area without good access roads. I think Ukraine hasn't brought in lots of personnel yet, but there is a small bridgehead. So there you go. That's kind of what's going on the front lines. We'll go to military aid. EU foreign ministers will today meet in Luxembourg during the Council of Europe foreign ministers. EU foreign ministers to discuss the provision of a new 3.5 billion euro military aid package to Ukraine. The EU High Representative Joseph Borrell reported. So still aid is coming in large quantities. Australia is coming up with the goods. It's transferred $110 million in military aid to Ukraine. This package, or it said it will include 28 M113 APCs, so the old American APCs, 14 special purpose vehicles, 14 trailers, 28 medium trucks, 105 millimeter caliber munitions. So that's really good. Also, $6 million to the United Nations to help provide Ukrainians with shelters, health services, water, and sanitation. That's according to the Guardian there, and this is still Australia. And that's 70 vehicles in total that they're sending. So that's really useful. And some of these trucks and trailers and whatnot, these are super useful for logistics. An army can't operate without those things. So yes, we concentrate a lot on the big headline things like leopard tanks and whatnot, but actually it's also super important they keep giving this stuff behind the lines. This is a Bodana self-propelled howitzer firing Excalibur ammunition, so precision guided munitions. This is its second generation, so this is quite important because this is an indigenous self-propelled howitzer that there was only one that had been made, a prototype in 2018. I don't know if that's the second generation one. We might start to see these turn up on the front line. So in January 2023, the two S-22 entered full production, according to Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov. The first units will be delivered in the next few months. Well, that was January this year. We're now in June. We're likely to be seeing these hitting the front line. I mean, they can fire up to 40 kilometers, although when they tested them, it was a little bit more than that with basic rounds, and then with rocket assisted projectiles, you can get 50 kilometers. So fairly in line with some of the other pieces of kit, like your kind of Archers and Caesars and whatnot. Pretty similar stuff there, but that'll be super useful if they can get a consistent production of those to the front line. Germany has opposed the idea of the EU transferring frozen assets of the central bank of the Russian Federation for the restoration of Ukraine. They think a hasty move could stir up legal or financial risks. I don't think this is Germany just being stuck in the mud about this and being difficult, because of connections to Russia or whatever you might think. Because the UK has long said this, and in fact, there was news about this over the last couple of weeks that it could be difficult. I know America are trying to do this an awful lot, which is liquidate the frozen assets and use them to support Ukraine, but actually is fraught with legal issues that are meaning that many nations are becoming more reticent to do that. UK have always said that they've been pretty cautious on that. Um, okay, so going on to geopolitical stuff here, President of Kazakhstan Tokayev held an extraordinary meeting of the Security Council in connection with the situation in Russia. The press service of the president reports he instructed the heads of departments of his country to be ready to respond to possible threats of crisis situations. Now, he is one that has not, he didn't come out in support when Putin phoned a couple of nearby leaders, CTSO, the kind of Eurasian answer to NATO. Tokayev said, "No, mate, you're on your own." Whereas Lukashenko was in support of Putin, the whole Prigozhin thing. This guy was like, "Yeah, not so much." So he is being pretty bold at the moment. And I think this is a fine time for some of those nations to be pretty opportunistic. I mean, Georgia would be a prime example, but they've got the Georgian Dream as their political party who have been siding more and more with Russia over time. But that you could imagine there would be some nations thinking, well, is now the time to try and break down this kind of relationship with Russia that's probably in the Russians' best interest and not ours so much. Yeah, now's a good time. Continuing on the geopolitical side of things, a final thing to say regards China, and people were asking me what's China's reaction to the Prigozhin thing. China downplayed the Wagner rebellion as Russia's internal affairs. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko held talks in Beijing on Sunday after the most serious challenge to President Putin's grip on power since he came to power in 2000. After that took place. So China's foreign ministry initially said that Rudenko had exchanged views with China's foreign minister Qin Gang on Sino-Russian relations, as well as international and regional issues of common concern. It later stated that China supports Russia in maintaining its national stability. Quote, as a friendly neighbor and comprehensive strategic partner in the new era, China supports Russia in maintaining national stability and achieving development and prosperity, it said, without explicitly referring to Putin personally. The Russian Foreign Ministry said China had declared its support for the leadership in Moscow. Quote, the Chinese side expressed support for the efforts of the leadership of the Russian Federation to stabilize the situation in the country in connection with the events of June the 24th, the Russian Foreign Ministry said. So it's kind of like treading lightly around the issue without dealing with it explicitly. A bit like I said yesterday, probably the best option for Putin would be to kind of ignore what happened as far as the messaging is concerned with his own domestic audience. The article in The Guardian continues, the rebellion had been closely followed by Chinese media, which largely refrained from commentary ahead of any official remarks. The Chinese state-controlled newspaper Global Times said on Saturday that hyping up the, quote, mutiny of Prigozhin and creating an, quote, illusion Russia has had many internal contradictions and, quote, the building is collapsing, amounted to the latest attack by Western media and another attempt to undermine Russian social unity. So, in other words, like bigging up this conversation of mutiny and the all these cracks in the Russian political edifice, the sort of stuff that I've been talking about, is just an attack by Western media and another attempt to undermine Russian social unity. That's how the Chinese are playing it, and that's of absolutely no surprise at all. So they are supportive of Russia without being like crazy supportive. They're just doing kind of what they've done for the most of the war, which is giving just about enough support to China to Russia, sorry, to keep the Russians sort of happy, whilst getting a lot more than they give in return. They are in the power position in this relationship. So Russia go to China with cup in hand and say, "Please, please, sir, can I have some more? Please help us." And China go, "Yeah, we'll help you," and give them like just a few grains of rice and say, "Oh, and by the way, we want this. We want access to Vladivostok. We want this and this and this." So they give very little to Russia, really, in the whole scheme of things, and are able, from what I can understand, to get quite a bit in return. So, China are probably uh, quite happy with how things are, I guess, in an odd way. Right, that's the news for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll get back to you later with my Frontline update. See if I can pore over the maps and find any changes that might take place. Later.